Welcome back to the Last Days Book Club, where we are reading the book entitled Dwelling in the Secret Place by Sonica Veith. This is an ebook available online for free at clashofminds.com, where you can download it and read along with us. Sonica Veith is the spouse of well-known evangelist, lecturer, university professor, and zoologist, Dr. Walter Veith. And this true story is a chronicle of their life together, their ministry, their numerous trials, tribulations, and hardships, as well as their successes, victories, and triumphs. In our last reading, we covered Chapter 9, entitled Our Refuge and Strength, where the Veiths continue to experience bitter trials and amazing triumphs. As the chapter opened, Walter was invited to conduct an evangelistic series in Germany, but they were so broke he would not be able to go. But the phone rang, and a lady told him that the Lord had impressed her to give money that she had been saving for God's work. The amount was 2,500 rand, which was more than a month's salary, enough for him to have money to take with him and to keep her and the kids until his return. Again, they were seeing God at work in their lives. On the other hand, although their children were attending church school, they were mocked and made fun of by their classmates. Tanya, their daughter, was especially made fun of, and the teachers did nothing. It got so that she would have to hide in the toilet during break time to eat her lunch. Sonica was also called in about their youngest son, Robert, who they claimed to be not doing well in his Bible classes, and attributed it to the demonic events that had taken place in his earlier childhood. The church members also condemned their diet, saying that if they would eat meat, they might not be so skinny and unhealthy. It was really difficult to see those who should be supportive and friendly being so cold and unfriendly. Also in this chapter, Walter had opportunity to preach to the black community in Zimbabwe, where he felt such love for those who had so little but were willing to give so much. This experience provided even more motivation for him to champion the poor and expose the rich and those who were motivated by political gain with no concern for the great suffering they left behind. He was also invited to preach at the huge squatter village in Cape Town, where even blacks were afraid to enter, and it was considered suicide for whites to enter. When they drove there, by a pure miracle, the blacks guarding the entrance with AK-47s looked at them and right through them as if they never saw them. And they entered without any trouble and also exited without any trouble. God, again, had worked in their behalf. Later on, Frenchie invited Walter to visit the 7 churches of Revelation in Turkey, as well as Egypt and Lebanon. Sonica wished that he wouldn't go and take a much-needed rest, but he went anyway, and came back revived and also humbled. Through an elderly, stooped Turkish lady, Walter's impatient, focused on one thing only attitude was brought to his own attention and reflection when he went to take a picture which was spoiled by a non-Adventist member of their tour group walking right in front of a picture he wanted to take for his presentations. He learned that the gospel was not just about teaching and preaching, but also about ministering to those in pain and suffering. Among other trials during this chapter, Sonica learned that she needed to have a hysterectomy. And when she took the surgery, due to the incompetence of the surgeon, she nearly died and had to have corrective surgery twice. The first a few days after her botched hysterectomy, and then almost 2 years later, when it was discovered that the butcher who performed the operation had torn one of her ovaries, and the other had gotten entangled between her intestines and bladder and fused into one big mass of tissue. During her 6-week recovery, she was alone at home when a squirrel came into her room and shared her lunch and hung out with her for a while. The squirrel did this every day until she recuperated enough to get up and go outside. On that day, he came running out of the oak tree, climbed up her leg, ran across her shoulder, and down the other leg, then disappeared. God had sent him to comfort her and reassure her that he was watching over her. Dear readers, don't forget, you can download this book for free at clashofminds.com and read along with us as we pick up the story today in chapter 10, entitled All Kinds of Trials. 1 Peter 1 and verse 6. Wherein ye greatly rejoice, though now for a season, if need be, ye are in heaviness through manifold temptations. Another season had come and gone, and once again, Walter was invited to deliver a series of lectures in Europe. No one was aware of our financial demise, and our hearts sank when the organizers asked us to book the ticket from South Africa. There was no money, even to get through the month. And now, we needed to pay for a ticket, buy some new warm clothing for the harsh European weather, and a suitcase. The only thing we have that's worth anything is our baccy, Walter said pensively. He was walking up and down, which he always does when he's stressed or contemplating a serious matter. Baccy is the word used in South Africa for a pickup truck. Oh, please, not baccy, I murmured silently to myself. But I knew that he was right. We had no other choice. With our hearts heavy and minds racing to try and find another solution, we went ahead and placed an advertisement in the local newspaper, secretly hoping that no one would respond. Within minutes after the newspaper was released, a man phoned to inquire about the vehicle. And that same day, we had an empty garage, but some money in our bank. Now, I was obliged to walk a couple of kilometers to the supermarket to do our shopping. And the only transport for the children was the little school bus. But we were not discouraged. Walter was looking forward to his trip. He had a burden for the German nation, and although he was born in South Africa, His parents were both from Germany, and he still felt strong ties with his people. Even though Walter's German vocabulary seemed like that of a child compared to the highly technical language spoken in Germany, the people seemed to appreciate the message, a message they had not heard before, primarily due to the fact that very few of the Adventist books had been translated into German, or perhaps that church members had limited access to even the English books that were written by Ellen G. White and the other pioneers. Very soon, young and old were changing their lifestyles, and tapes on health and the heated debate over creation versus evolution were circulated not only in the church, but also among the general public. People were testifying about the health benefits they were enjoying after following a healthier lifestyle. Some were healed from stomach cancer. Others found relief from arthritis, even at the high age of 80. Even asthma and sinusitis sufferers expressed their gratitude for having been informed about the allergenic effects of food additives and especially dairy products. Besides the usual stressful trips through Germany, Walter was during this trip able to gather a lot of information from people who were involved in secret societies. On one occasion, while Walter was entering the building where the lectures would take place, he suddenly felt that someone grabbed him by the back of his suit and pulled him into a broom closet in the passage. It was pitch dark, and all he could hear was the breathing behind him. "Don't turn around, Dr. Veith," someone said softly in German. "If you see me, we will both be in serious trouble." Walter wondered whether he was being kidnapped or something worse, but he didn't say a word. "I will be giving you some information about Catholicism and their connection to secret societies, but you may never let anyone know where you got it from. You have to promise me. Sometime this week, I will find you again, and I will give you some very valuable books," the man's voice continued in the dark. The next night, Walter was walking slowly and apprehensively into the building, expecting the unseen hand to haul him into a dark cupboard. But nothing happened. However, when everyone had left the building after the lecture, suddenly he was pulled into a closet where a bag of books was unceremoniously shoved into Walter's hands, and the voice told him to leave without looking back. Walter was sweating under the collar and was grateful to step out into the cool, fresh air outside. He never heard from the man again and started to study the secret books that provided him with deeper insight into the clandestine world of the agents of Satan on earth. The rest of the lecture series was uneventful, but unfortunately, he not only received gratitude for reviving the old message of our pioneers, but at the same time, some prominent members and leaders in the church rose like mushrooms to oppose him. It was an icy winter's day when Walter arrived in Switzerland. He had been traveling across the spectacular mountains covered in snow and looked forward to speaking to the people of that beautiful country. The church had invited him to speak in Zurich to a large gathering of Adventists. He settled down in the room prepared for him, revised some of the lectures for a while, and then went to bed. It was 2 o'clock in the morning when the phone suddenly rang. The voice of a high official at that time in the Euro-African division of the Seventh-day Adventist Church greeted him in cordial but icy tones, colder than the gray landscape beyond the little window of his room. Dr. Veith, I would like to ask you not to speak on anything concerning the Pope. I beg your pardon? What do you mean? You may not in any way say that the Pope is the Antichrist. But the Antichrist was identified and preached by the spirit of prophecy and our pioneers. Why shouldn't we identify him as well? Walter asked indignantly. That might have been the paradigm in those days, but it no longer applies today. You know, Walter started slowly, I left the Catholic Church and came into the Adventist Church on the grounds of the studies I made of the prophecies in Daniel, which identify the Antichrist very clearly. And according to the Bible, and also the spirit of prophecy, the Antichrist will remain the same until the end of time on this earth. When I was baptized, I confirmed my acceptance of these biblical facts and the spirit of prophecy in my baptismal vows. Didn't you do that too? These things no longer are valid. Times have changed, the man persisted, unwilling to commit himself. Well, I'm sorry. Then I don't have to listen to you because you're not an Adventist. Walter said this in his typical fiery fashion when confronted. Like the impetuous Peter, his first reaction was often drawing his sword and lopping off the ear of the enemy to protect his master. The rivers of time and experience had not yet shaped and softened his jagged edges. He wished the man a good night and ended the conversation. When he climbed back into bed, he was unable to sleep. He sat upright in bed, mulling their conversation over and over, when once again the phone rang. This time, it was the president of the conference. He spoke more kindly than the previous brother and tactfully tried to convince Walter that he should refrain from speaking on any topic other than science, his specialty. He was to leave theological subjects to the experts, the theologians. Walter replied that his lectures and the hundreds of slides were already prepared for the events, and that he had too little time to prepare any other lectures. Their conversation was short and sweet, but Walter was left with a bitter aftertaste as he went back to bed. Though he tried to ignore the uneasy feeling gnawing at the pit of his stomach, he couldn't go back to sleep. He tossed and turned, feeling confused, hurt, angry, and eventually even distrustful of self. He was convinced that the papacy hadn't changed. But why did the Adventists change their position? Or was it possible that the message he brought to the people was too strong? Was he the one who should change his approach? As always, when wrestling with some issue concerning his work for God, he reached for his Bible and the counsels that were given to ministers and evangelists in the books Testimonies to Ministers and Evangelism. After a while, he found the peace he was so desperately seeking. The more he read, the more he knew that he had to continue speaking about the truth that God has entrusted to him. In the very time which we live, the Lord has called his people and has given them a message to bear. He has called them to expose the wickedness of the man of sin who has made the Sunday law a distinctive power, who has thought to change times and laws and to oppress the people of God, who stand firmly to honor him by keeping the only true Sabbath, the Sabbath of creation, as holy to the Lord. Testimonies to Ministers, page 118, and Evangelism, page 233, paragraph 2. Wickedness is reaching a height never before attained, and yet many ministers of the gospel are crying peace and safety. But God's faithful messengers are to go steadily forward with their work. Clothed with the panoply of heaven, they are to advance fiercely and victoriously, never ceasing their warfare until every soul within their reach have received the message of truth for this time. Acts of the Apostles, pages 219 and 220 of 1911. Also Evangelism, page 705, paragraph 4. When Sunday observance shall be enforced by law, and the world shall be enlightened concerning the obligation of the true Sabbath, then whoever shall transgress the command of God to obey a precept which has no higher authority than that of Rome will thereby honor popery above God. He's paying homage to Rome and the power which enforces the institution ordained by Rome. He's worshiping the beast and his image. The Great Controversy, page 449, 1888. Also Evangelism, page 233, paragraph 4. The winter sun crept feebly through the window onto his bed as he closed his books and started to get ready for the grueling day that lay ahead of him. But in his heart, the sun of righteousness was rising steadily, warming his numb body and brightening the shadows that had been cast across his path. He was to take up his position in the ancient play depicting the great controversy between Jesus, the only Son of God, and the archenemy, Lucifer. The stage being this once beautiful earth, and the battleground, the mind of every living soul trapped in deception and sin. We know that it is soon to end. Jesus has emptied himself and died to give us eternal peace and victory over self and sin. But until then, Satan will seek to discourage the followers of Christ so that they may not pray or study the scriptures, and he will throw his hateful shadow athwart the path to hide Jesus from the view, to shut away the vision of his love and the glories of his heavenly inheritance. It is his delight to cause the children of God to go shrinkingly, tremblingly, and painfully along under continual doubt. He seeks to make the pathway as sorrowful as possible. But if you keep looking up, not down at your difficulties, you will not faint in the way. You will soon see Jesus reaching his hand to help you, and you will only have to give him your hand in confidence and let him lead you. As you become trustful, you will become hopeful. Messages to Young People, page 63, paragraph 2. The huge hall in the center of town seated a couple of thousand people and was steadily filling up with Adventists from all over. The lecture he had prepared was on Bible prophecy, but halfway through the lecture, people started shouting insults from the audience, and some even walked out of the meeting. Discouraged and hurt, Walter completed the lecture and walked back to the stage behind the curtains to seek guidance from God. Now he was doubtful that it was the right message for the people and wondered if God was really leading him. While he was silently calling out to God, a group of pastors came through the curtains towards him. Well, this is the end, he thought to himself. They're coming to throw me out and ship me back to Africa. Some people had indeed told him before to go back to Africa, to the bush where he came from, and to his second-rate university. But instead of attacking him, young and old pastors smiled and greeted him like a long-lost son. An old man wiped the tears from his cheeks and hugged him, looking straight at him with a gentle but strong deportment and eyes that can tell many a tale. Thank you so much, Brother Veith, for your preaching the old message to us again. Things have changed so much in the church, we can't preach this message anymore, he said sadly. The next day, the organizers came to fetch him to meet the minister of the large Protestant evangelical church. They had rented the hall of the evangelical church for the evangelistic meetings and needed to confirm with them that everything was in place for the next evening's opening lecture. On the way, they continued to try and persuade Walter that he must not say anything in his lectures that might offend the other churches. After all, they concluded, we're all brothers belonging to one universal Christian church. No, we're not, Walter said boldly. Their doctrines used to be Bible-based, but not anymore. There are many honest people in those churches who are searching for truth. There are many more that are dissatisfied with what is happening in their churches. And that is the reason I'm doing these lectures. And if I don't tell them what's wrong in their church, they won't be able to see why Revelation 14, verse 8, and Revelation 18, verse 2, say that Babylon is fallen, which, as you know, is not only Rome, but fallen Protestantism also. They won't see any reason to come out of their churches, and their blood will be on our hands if we do not warn them. There was deathly silence as the car droned on to the hall. Occasionally, only an embarrassed cough would break the silence, each one feeling the painful distance growing between brother and brother. The evangelical minister seemed quite friendly. He greeted them one by one at the door in typical German fashion and guided them to the hall. Walter couldn't but notice a series of plaques hanging in the foyer depicting the creation of the world. But to his amazement, it was not a Christian version, but a very New Age one with Brahma breathing everything into existence. The minister turned and asked them in a matter-of-fact way what the lectures were about. All eyes were on Walter. none of the organizers of the Adventist Church dared to say a word. He explained that he would discuss the debate on evolution versus creation from his perspective as a scientist. The man said slowly. And what view will you be taking on this issue? Well, I will be giving scientific evidence for the authenticity of creation, in particular the biblical flood, and in that case, the minister interrupted, I'm afraid we cannot let you have our hall. You will have to cancel your lectures. I beg your pardon? We cannot allow you to preach such archaic viewpoints in our hall. We do not accept the creation view in our church. Walter watched his brothers closely. Some seemed to be dumbfounded. Another reflected open shock in his face. And yet another stared down at the floor, as if pretending to be unaware of what had transpired. But we can't cancel now, they seemed to all say at the same time. We have already printed the pamphlets. I have an idea, Walter said diplomatically. If I announce that we have merely rented the venue and that the evangelical church has nothing to do with it, will you be happy then? In silence, the minister considered the proposal for a while and then said emphatically, You will have to announce before every lecture that the evangelical church distances itself entirely from the views that are propagated at these meetings. I'll be very happy to do so, Walter said, smiling broadly. How amazing is our God! He not only provided more evidence for his lectures to show that the Protestant churches have indeed become fallen Babylon by accepting unbiblical doctrines into their church, but he also showed the naive brethren of the Adventist church how far the Protestant churches have fallen. And that was only scratching the surface of a cancer that was steadily growing worldwide, the tip of an iceberg that had to be met head on, even in the slumbering Adventist church. During the forthcoming lecture series, many skeptics opposed him openly, but none so vehemently as during the lecture on the New Age movement, where he spoke about Benjamin Creme being the medium or channel for the spirit entity Maitreya, the one who is preparing the world for his coming to bring all religions together in peace. Walter explained that the fallen angel Lucifer is preparing to set up his kingdom, claiming this world as his and denying the atoning sacrifice of the true Savior who brought back man from his slavery to the prince of this world. Absolute nonsense, some shouted as they got up and stormed out of the hall. Who has ever heard of this Maitreya? Discouraged at their reaction, but not willing to give Satan the victory, Walter continued his lecture. Then, to his surprise, after only a few minutes, they returned in a huff, white with shock, reporting excitingly that Walter was right. Benjamin Creme did not only exist, but was in the hotel next to the hall. As they had left the hall, they explained, a whole crowd was rushing out of the hotel, shouting, Maitreya is here! Maitreya is here! They had been to the meeting of Benjamin Creme in the hotel when he was overshadowed by the Maitreya and started giving channeled messages to the people. The group that had been to Walter's lectures got such a fright that they ran back into the hall to report this coincidence to the rest of the audience. Once again, God and his purposes came out victorious. He had planned long ago to have Walter's meetings in the hall next to the hotel. He knew long before the event that Benjamin Krem would be there, and he even planned the lecture that had to be given that particular evening, despite efforts to silence Walter and to prevent him from speaking at that venue. God tested his faith in the inner chambers of his soul. In the secret place of thunder, he counseled with him and gave him another character-building experience, which continued to strengthen him as he encountered even stronger opposition. Psalm 81 and verse 7. Thou callest in trouble, and I delivered thee. I answered thee in the secret place of thunder. I proved thee at the waters of Meribah. Selah. Even the unbelieving Thomases in our church were now convinced of a dimension in the spiritual realm that they knew nothing of, and they started to understand that souls can be reached by revealing to them the deception they were trapped in, and then pointing them to the truth and the only author thereof. A valuable lesson was learned. If you preach Jesus and his love only, you're preaching to the converted, only because the atheist and the agnostic will find no reason to leave his position. If you preach the conflict of the ages, the great controversy between the innocent Lamb of God and his rebellious rival in its diverse forms, you're reaching everyone in every walk of life. In the cities of today, where there is so much to attract and please, the people can be interested by no ordinary efforts. Ministers of God's appointment will find it necessary to put forth extraordinary efforts in order to arrest the attention of the multitudes. And when they succeed in bringing together a large number of people, they must bear messages of a character so out of the usual order that the people will be aroused and warned. They must make use of every means that can possibly be devised for causing the truth to stand out clearly and distinctly. Testimonies, Volume 9, page 109, written in 1909. Also Evangelism, page 122 and verse 3. When the sinner is made aware of the magnitude of sin and deception, scales fall from his eyes. He sees clearly the contrast between the character of the sin-loving, soul-destroying evil one and his plethora of lies, and the character of the humble, pure, sinless Son of God, and his simple but profound truth. After the woman caught in adultery was brought to Jesus, she was made aware of the cutting contrast between the satanic characters of her accusers and the character of Jesus, and she was instantly drawn to him. At the same time, she became aware of her own sin that had kept her trapped for so long. Jesus showed her kindness and forgiveness, and then not only bid her to leave that world of sin, but also proceeded to make a call to others to come out of darkness into the light. John 8, verse 12. Then spake Jesus again unto them, saying, I am the light of the world. He that followeth me shall not walk in darkness, but shall have the light of life. In a special sense, Seventh-day Adventists have been set in the world as watchmen and light bearers. To them has been entrusted the last warning for a perishing world. On them is shining wonderful light from the Word of God. They have been given a work of the most solemn import, the proclamation of the first, second, and third angels' messages. There is no other work of so great importance. They are to allow nothing else to absorb their attention. Evangelism, page 119, paragraph 3. After the series in the hall of the evangelical church had ended, Walter was taken to an alpine retreat, quite away into the mountains. The scenes were breathtaking. Fir branches hung low under the weight of soft powdery snow, and Walter breathed deeply the fresh aroma of pine forest and moss as he stepped out of the car. He was bracing himself for what he knew was to be another painful battle. Already he had been warned to say nothing offensive, because many prominent officials had been invited to the meetings to gain recognition for the Adventist Church with the community. The Adventist leadership probably felt it was necessary to eradicate the image of a sect from the minds of the public and to show them that we are just another good Christian church doing good Christian works. Our embarrassing, distinguishing features were not to be made prominent. But Walter's understanding of our mission was that of winning souls for God, calling them out of Babylon, and warning them of the natural, health, economic, political, and spiritual disasters already there and still to come. This might be the last opportunity for each soul to hear the message of hope and return to God, he argued. We are to give to the world a manifestation of the pure, noble, holy principles that are to distinguish the people of God from the world. Instead of the people of God becoming less and less definitely distinguished from those who do not keep the seventh-day Sabbath, they are to make the observance of the Sabbath so prominent that the world cannot fail to recognize them as Seventh-day Adventists. Manuscript number 162 of 1903. Also, Evangelism, page 233, paragraph 1. One of the high-ranking guests that were invited to the meetings was an important member of the nobility of the family of Liechtenstein. During every lecture, as Walter proceeded to build up to a crescendo, he noticed the organizers shift uncomfortably in their chairs, and after each lecture, they took him aside and rebuked him. "You're going to chase all our guests away. You don't know how much damage you're doing. What will they think of the Adventist? You should only preach about the love of Christ, nothing else. You have not heard the end of this," one of the organizers said angrily, and stormed away in a huff. Walter was silent, feeling the dagger driven deeply into his heart, but continued to prepare his slides for the next lectures. He looked cold and drawn, exhausted by the constant conflict, and he longed to be home with his family and friends. The Adventist people, the leadership, and the public in South Africa at that time never reacted in such an uncouth manner towards him. Admittedly, the church found his approach very different, but many outsiders and many backslidden Adventists had already come into the church because of his unusual messages. South Africa was grateful for new fruits that were ready for the picking. People from different walks of life and it took some extraordinary tact and heavenly wisdom and certainly knowledge to deal with them. Some had been active in the occult or New Age world, and others came from churches where Satan was displaying his false healings and other manifestations. And many came out of the Catholic and Muslim faiths. But the church proved to be ill-equipped to know how to nurture these souls. At the end of the last lecture, one of the Adventist leaders reluctantly came forward, embarrassment written all over his face. He and his colleagues probably wished for the earth to swallow them up. Visibly being of two minds, he proceeded to thank the speaker briefly when a member of the nobility of Liechtenstein jumped up and started to thank Walter personally for the lectures and for the courage he had to present them in such a clear way. Although the information was sometimes overwhelming, he said his eyes were opened, and he was grateful for the opportunity to have attended the seminars. The crowd burst into spontaneous applause, and suddenly the Adventist brethren were smiling from ear to ear. No more mention was further made of the lectures, and Walter was driven back to the airport, all secretly sighing a deep sigh of relief. But Walter's ordeal was not over yet. He had a few hours to recover before the next bout in the boxing ring would take place. Some cold water in his face, some adrenaline in the cuts, a whiff from the smelling salts, and he was ready for round number 2. Arriving in Germany, Sven was happy to see him and took him to his home. He had organized several speaking appointments in Germany, mostly to open audiences, and the turf was proving to be almost as tough as in Switzerland. Europe, in general, had become very secular and materialistic, and the battles Protestants had fought in the not-so-distant past lay buried under the false sense of security and prosperity they had achieved without God. Africa, on the other hand, experienced escalating revolutions, hardships, and poverty, and Christians had not yet relinquished dependence on their Savior, who had brought them out of persecution in Europe, a land of religious freedom. Speaking on such momentous truths to the outside world was tiresome, and Walter looked forward to his appointment to speak to the students at the Adventist College on the topic evolution versus creation, thinking that the students would appreciate hearing more evidence to substantiate their Bible-based faith. But even before Walter could start the lecture, one of the students confronted him from the audience, asking him what his viewpoint on the issue was. Well, being an Adventist Christian, Walter replied, his personal stance is obviously that of creation. With that, the student, who seemed to be a leader of some kind, got up and summoned a large group of students to leave the hall, for they need not listen to such rubbish. Fortunately, having worked with students for many years, Walter had quite a few tactics up his sleeve. He continued to present his lecture to the rest of the audience as he noticed the rebellious group gather outside the window of the hall to discuss the matter further. Slowly, while he was speaking, he started making his way towards the window, and when he was within hearing distance of the group, he said loudly, "And this has become a real problem in our society today. People have become cowards. They're unwilling to stand up and ask what is truth. They're spoon-fed anything that tastes good without reading the label to see if it is real food. You know why? They're too afraid that they will discover something they don't want to hear. Drastic circumstances require drastic measures, he reflected. He wasn't quite sure if he had chosen the right approach for these young people. They were so different to the South African youth, but he was hoping that his challenge would have the required reaction. He then started moving back towards the middle of the hall to continue his discussion. Sure enough, one by one, some of the group started moving back into the hall until quite a few of the empty places were filled again. The next day, the hall was packed, and at the end of the series, the students thanked him for strengthening their faith and giving them the scientific ammunition to defend their position. In a little town in Germany, Walter was to present a short series on prophecy. As soon as he had settled into the room they provided for him, there was a knock on the door, and the pastor of the church where the meeting was to be held entered like an unruly gust of wind. He hardly greeted Walter and demanded to have Walter's slides that he would be using in the lectures. "Why do you want my slides?" Walter asked in a distrustful tone. "I need to make the slides better," was the answer from the pastor. "Make them better? What do you mean?" By now the pastor was getting agitated, and he moved towards Walter's bag containing the books and slides. "I just need to see your slides. I need to make them better." Before the pastor could reach out to pick up the bag, Walter pulled it towards himself and clung for dear life to his most precious belonging. "No," he said firmly. "I do not let anyone touch my slides. This is my life's work, and no one is going to make them better." The pastor seemed like he was about to throw a tantrum, but he turned around and walked out the door without saying another word. That evening, there was a commotion as the church members were getting everything ready for the opening night of the lecture series in their church. The pastor was also scurrying about, and as he walked past Walter, he said in a matter-of-fact manner, "You refuse to give me your slides? Then see if you can give your lecture without a slide projector." Walter's mind was racing. What was he to do now? The hall was packed, and after the initial greetings and announcements by the pastor, the church choir sang a few songs. Then it was Walter's turn. He walked up the steps onto the platform, greeted the audience, and said, "Our organizers forgot to bring the slide projector, and I'm sure you won't mind if the choir sings us a few more of their beautiful songs while he fetches the projector." The pastor didn't expect that. He glanced at Walter as he got up reluctantly and walked out the door while the choir filed onto the stage to sing their songs. In his last lecture, Walter attempted to show his audience that the final true church was the one that John in Revelation prophesied about, that they would restore the faith in the commandments of God, as well as hold to Jesus, the only Savior, and would also preach the three angels' message in Revelation 14 to all the world. He showed the audience that historically there was only one church that could come into existence after the great disappointment of 1844, which has all the criteria as described in the Bible, and that was the Seventh-day Adventist Church. Revelation 14, verse 12. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. His words had hardly left his lips when the pastor jumped up and rushed up onto the stage, where he grabbed the microphone from Walter and proceeded to apologize profusely to the audience for what the speaker had just said, and that his church does not endorse the sentiments of the speaker. The message Walter had preached had everyone sitting on the edges of their seats, for no one had ever heard these things before. But now the moment was spoiled, and a restless spirit settled on the people. It was later established why the pastor had reacted that way. He had invited his friends, the bishop, and other high-placed officials in the Catholic Church to the meetings, since he himself often preached in their churches. No wonder he wanted to make Walter's slides better. Walter feared for these people and wondered how his beloved church would ever be able to stand when persecuted for their faith. Jeremiah 12 and verse 5. If thou hast run with the footmen, and they have wearied thee, then how canst thou contend with horses? And if in the land of peace, wherein thou trustest, they wearied thee, how then wilt thou do in the swelling of Jordan? The next stop was Poland. The landscape was bleak. The skies were gray, and snow covered the sidewalks up to a meter. The icy wind cut through the flimsy South African jacket he brought before he left home, and snow slurry crept into his African shoes through the seams. The man who brought him to his room was large and struggled to get out from behind the steering wheel. A multi-story building towered in front of them. During communism, the Adventist church buildings were confiscated and used by the government, and after communism fell, the government was obligated to restore some buildings to the church. One of the buildings they received was this huge block office in Warsaw, which housed pastors' apartments, offices, and even the church and Sabbath school classrooms. Walter's room was right at the top of the building, the only window being a skylight covered with snow in the roof. It was freezing cold, and the central heating didn't seem to reach the top of the building. "I'm sorry I cannot take you to my home. You eat strange, and my wife can't cook for you," the pastor said in his Polish accent. "I will see you tomorrow, yes?" He closed the door behind him, and Walter heard his heavy footsteps disappear down the hall. He was tired and cold, and had eaten very little all day, but he sat down on his bed and started to prepare his lectures for the next few days. The night was cold and long, and he managed to sleep but a few hours. He washed and got dressed, but he was still cold. He decided to dress in layers, and soon he was wearing 2 pairs of socks, long underwear, regular pants, a warm vest, shirt, 2 jerseys, his flimsy jacket, beanie, gloves, and scarf, but his teeth still kept chattering. He then took the blanket from his bed and folded it around his shoulders and sat down to read his Bible. An hour passed, then another, and soon it was already past lunchtime, but still there was no sign of the pastor. Walter was starving, and he wondered if there was some place where he could buy some bread. He went out into the hall to look through the window at the end of the long passage, but there was no shopping center in sight, not even a little corner cafe anywhere to be seen. There were very few cars in the street, and even fewer pedestrians. He had no idea where he was, and couldn't speak one word in Polish. He had just returned to his room when there was a brief knock at the door, and the pastor walked in with a small bowl of watery soup. He made some conversation and then started expressing his displeasure for the inconvenience Walter's vegetarian diet is causing. Walter was still contemplating how this man knew about his diet, because he never pushed the issue with anyone he ever stayed with, when the pastor's hand disappeared into the pocket of his jacket and he placed a dry bread roll on the table. Still mumbling to himself, he greeted and left. The next day, Walter waited again until halfway through the afternoon before the pastor returned. By this time, he was feeling weak and colder than ever. He was looking forward to a steaming plate of potatoes and sauerkraut or some other Polish food with gravy and lentil patties, and the pastor entered with a side plate in his hand, which he placed on the table in front of Walter. 2 dumplings stared at him like 2 blind eyes on a plate. Eagerly, Walter waited for the pastor to produce something else from his rumpled jacket pocket, but the man merely mumbled a few words and left. In a few seconds, he had gulped down the little balls almost without chewing. Then he knew that he needed to start making plans for survival. He grabbed his scarf, beanie, and gloves, locked his room, and left. Outside, he started walking down the snow-covered road in search of a store where he could buy something to eat. He had lost considerable weight and knew that if he did not find something soon, he would get sick and would not be able to give the lectures. He tried to ask some of the people in the street where he could find a grocery store, but no one understood him. He kept on wandering up and down the little streets, and just as he was about to give up and turn back, he noticed some smoke in the distance. He continued to struggle through the heavy snow toward the only sign of life, when he noticed some people disappear down muggy steps into the basement of a building. And eagerly he followed and found himself in a smelly, dark store. All he could see were hams and dried sausages hanging from hooks in the ceiling, and not a single piece of bread or anything he could eat. He was about to leave, his heart heavy with disappointment, when he noticed a shelf in the back of the shop with some bottles. He rummaged through them, and to his joy, he found one small bottle of peanut butter. He paid for his precious item, placed it in his pocket, and hastened back to his room, where he ate the whole bottle in one go with his finger, and felt a little better than before. The next afternoon, the pastor arrived with nothing in his hand and nothing in his pocket. "I will have to take you to a restaurant, yes? Here there is nothing for you in kitchen. God knows how any man can live like you," he mumbled, and started walking towards his car. They drove to an upper-class area in town and stopped in front of what seemed like a very fancy restaurant. When Walter asked for something vegetarian, if possible some potatoes, the pastor laughed out loud and translated to the waiter with much gesticulating and shaking of his head. Then he ordered for himself, but Walter couldn't understand what he said. Soon, the food arrived on 2 large plates. The vegetable platter which the waiter placed before Walter consisted of a few sprigs of celery and thinly sliced carrots, 1 piece of steamed broccoli, 2 small florets of cauliflower, and some parsley. He glanced over to the plate of the pastor. The large plate was filled with a heaped bed of rice, covered with every kind of seafood imaginable: crab, crayfish, oysters, fish, prawns. Walter wondered if the pastor had ever read Leviticus 11 on the unclean foods. In the 3 days he had been in Warsaw, he had eaten one white bread roll, a small bowl of watery soup, 2 dumplings, and a small bottle of peanut butter. And now, to crown it all, he could stick everything on his plate onto one fork, chew it for a few seconds, and it was gone. He longed for some potatoes. Even the skins of the potatoes would have been good. As he sat waiting for the pastor to finish his meal, he found himself coveting every forkful that disappeared down the hatch in the chubby face opposite him. But those rosy cheeks became white as ash when the bill came. By the look on his face, Walter knew the meal cost more than what a pastor could afford, without a doubt a great deal more, and he probably blamed it on Walter. That evening, Walter gave a lecture on our health principles and decided to include clean and unclean foods as described in Leviticus 11 for the sake of the pastor who was sitting in the front row of the audience. As he got to the portion on unclean foods, he noticed that the pastor was fast asleep. Mischievously, he walked closer to where the pastor was sitting and spoke loudly into the microphone, waking the unsuspecting pastor momentarily. He quickly tried to introduce his topic, but to no avail. The pastor had fallen asleep again. The next day, he was taken to a venue where the leadership had organized an interdenominational meeting with leaders from other religions. Clergy dressed in impressive vestments arrived and took their places. Then the arrival of the Catholic cardinal was announced, and all rose as he entered in his splendid black and purple garment and sash, followed by a whole entourage of priests and nuns dressed in black. One of the faithful pastors of the Adventist church sat down beside Walter and nudged him with his elbow, and without exchanging a word, each knew what the other was thinking. Proudly, the Adventist spokesman opened the meeting and introduced the cardinal, who admitted he was surprised that the Adventist church was interested in engaging in ecumenical relations. "Oh," the spokesman said, as he made what looked like a semi-curtsy before the cardinal, "the Adventists would love to work together with all Christian denominations." He turned and looked towards the audience. "This we are doing internationally," he continued, "and at this very point we have an international speaker here with us. Dr. Veith, would you like to give our honored guest, the Cardinal, a message from Africa? Please come forward, Dr. Veith, yes?" Walter's ally nudged him and smiled at him mischievously. He was totally unprepared for this, but got up and walked slowly to the front, his mind racing to find something suitable to say. The message he would really like to bring to the cardinal is the third angel's message of Revelation 14. Do not worship the beast and accept this false Sabbath, which is the mark of the beast. But that wouldn't go down well under the circumstances. To the leaders of the other Christian churches, he would like to give the second angel's message, which is Babylon is fallen, with the additional plea to come out of her, for she has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. That would not be accepted very well either. Walter smiled to himself as he imagined their reaction and such a message at an ecumenical meeting. The only other message that remained was the first angel's message. So he proceeded to speak briefly about the everlasting gospel, the unchanged and unchangeable message of him who created everything and will soon judge everything. A message that was handed down through the ages and is to be proclaimed to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. He then greeted the delegates on behalf of all who loved the everlasting gospel and returned to his seat. Whether they understood the implications of the everlasting gospel, he couldn't know, but all applauded and seemed quite happy. The next day, he was taken to the south of Poland, where he stayed with a very warm-hearted family that made up for all the kilograms he had lost. Here, he felt at home and ate like a king, and even his lectures were received with joy and appreciation. God has his faithful ones all over the world, brothers and sisters that follow the old paths, walk in the footsteps of their master, and hold up the pillars of our faith, undaunted by pressures from within or without the church, true ministers of the gospel. Mark 9 and verse 41. For whosoever shall give you a cup of water to drink in my name, because ye belong to Christ, verily I say unto you, he shall not lose his reward. The night before Walter had to leave, he felt homesick and discouraged. He had been away so long. How he missed having his family with him, and he longed for peace from the incessant conflict that followed him wherever he went. He wished people could understand what he was going through, but many thought he was doing this for some form of private gain, be it financial or for some ego trip. He lay awake some time, thinking about the sacrifices the early Christians and those that followed them through the ages had made. His heart went out to Paul and the other apostles that were stoned, to the Waldenses who were smoked out of the caves where they hid, or smothered and burned and thrown off the cliffs of the Alps for copying the received text scriptures, and the reformers that stood up to the church of the Dark Ages and consequently were tortured and burned at the stake. None of them received any reward on this earth, but their treasure was laid up in heaven. Their hope was eternal life with Christ. 2 Corinthians 11 and verse 26. In journeyings often, in perils of waters, in perils of robbers, in perils by mine own countrymen, in perils by the heathen, in perils in the city, in perils in the wilderness, in perils in the sea, in perils among false brethren, in weariness and painfulness, in watchings often, in hunger and thirst, in fastings often, in cold and nakedness, besides those things that are without, that which cometh upon me daily, the care of all the churches. 2 Corinthians 11, verses 26 through 28. Once again, Walter returned to Germany after the lecture series in the south of Poland was over. He preached there for a short while in the church in the south of Germany where Sven attended and where the message was welcomed. Then came the long-awaited day that he would return home. Before they left for the airport, Sven handed Walter a sealed envelope with the strict instruction not to open it before he reaches home. He thanked Sven, wondering for a brief moment what it was, and then popped it into his bag and soon forgot about it. Tired, but with a satisfying sense of having achieved something meaningful for God and mankind, Walter stepped out of the car as they stopped at Frankfurt Airport. He waved at Sven as he disappeared around the corner, picked up his luggage, and breathed a sigh of relief as he turned to leave the rain and cold behind. He was going home. The end of chapter 10 of Dwelling in the Secret Place.